The information shared in this episode is not intended to serve as a substitute for mental health services and is only intended to provide education and information to you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in to the Honeybee Podcast. I am excited about bringing you today's episode because it is on a heavily debated topic amongst parents. That is, to spank or not to spank. This episode was inspired by a message that I received from a listener who states the following. Dear Honeybee, my boyfriend and I were watching a television show, and a child in the episode, about the age of 4 or 5, did something that their parent clearly instructed them not to do several times. I commented to my boyfriend that the parents needed to spank the kid for not listening to the instruction that had been given to them. My boyfriend disagreed, stating that it would make more sense to have a conversation with a child and how important it was to consider other forms of punishment. It's important for me to share that we both received corporal punishment growing up. While we could agree that we hated that sort of consequence, we don't agree on whether it improves a kid's behavior, nor could we agree on whether spanking should be used if we ever decided to have children. So who's right? That is a wonderful question. I did some research and found valuable information from various sources that are outlined in the show notes. What I can tell you is that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that parents do not spank or use other physical punishments towards their children. The AAP asserts that physical punishments like spanking only encourages aggressive behaviors and will become ineffective if used often. In addition, I found a study that was completed back in 2013, which reflected 10 out of 11 children who were a part of this particular study were more aggressive when they received spankings as a form of punishment. In addition to the aggression that would come about due to the spankings, there were some changes in the kiddo's cognitive functioning, and the changes were quite drastic. The research found a connection between early spankings, which they found as early as 1 year of age, with a lower vocabulary score by the age of 5. I want to take this a step further in that children at the age of 3 that received spankings about 2 times a month, again, were more aggressive towards others by the age of 5, more so than their peers who did not receive corporal punishment. To state that clearly and more plainly, children by the age of 3 that had spankings 2 times a month, at least twice a month, were more aggressive than their peers who hadn't by the time that particular group reached the age of 5. So we know that spankings that happen 2 times a month, and it's important for me to note that this particular episode is focused on children about the age of 6 and younger who are, receiving spankings. Children who have spankings twice a month, they are more aggressive, and it is also found children who receive spankings 2 times a week or more is exposed to something far more devastating, which is called toxic stress. Toxic stress is defined by Dr. Pat Levitt, who is a professor of neurogenetics at Harvard University, defines it as a kind of experience that occurs particularly in childhood, which has effects negatively on brain structure and brain chemistry. Toxic stress can alter the brain's architecture, again, the structure, in a child and will lead to many adverse hindering outcomes. What I know is that when a person is under stress, and I will just kind of keep it in context, a child is under distress, especially based upon this research, having spankings happening 2 times a week or more, having this toxic stress releases stress related hormones like cortisol, for example, and that negatively impacts the organs and organ functioning, and the brain is an organ. So, not only is a child more likely to be aggressive, they're more likely to have changes in the functioning and structure of their brain. There is a heightened sensitivity for that child in terms of their ability of not being able to control their impulses effectively. When a child is under severe stress and high alert, which happens when one is experiencing toxic stress, it is difficult for them to take in new information. It is more difficult for them to reason. Therefore, they are going to struggle as a student. It goes without saying that these negative effects do not stop just because we age. That kid that I described earlier is likely to continue to have aggressive behavior, poor impulse control, health issues, and the like as they get older. I don't want to give stress a totally negative reputation because there are times that stress can be positive. For example, positive stress is where our heart rate increases. We have a mild elevation in stress hormones. It gives us inspiration to be energized. This sort of positive stress is in new situations like our first day at school or going to a doctor that we haven't been to before, new things. Then we have tolerable stress, which is not super pleasant, but it's a part of life in that we experience temporary yet serious stress responses after something happens in our life, like a loss of a loved one or being a part of a natural disaster or having some sort of frightening energy. This tolerable stress, in spite of the stress hormones that are getting dumped out of the brain and into the body, are mitigated by having supportive, consistent, and loving relationships with family members or friends or whoever is meaningful to that child. This sort of tolerable stress does not have any long lasting negative impact on the brain or other organs for that matter. Toxic stress is different. That prolonged activation of the stress response system, again, just makes it so difficult for a child and an adult, but we're talking about children. I'm talking about children, for them to function skillfully across environments, school, relationships, at home, etc., etc. Many of you may be wondering, okay, now I know what not to do. So please tell me what to do instead, because of course, something has to be done. And naturally, in light of the AAP telling us that it's not effective and harmful actually to spank our children, they have a few ideas that will help with problem solving this particular dilemma. First one, know the difference between discipline and punishment. Discipline is when we train our children that will allow them to have the ability to correct their behavior, and discipline molds moral character. Punishment, on the other hand, is severe or rough treatment that serves as retribution. The energy of those two definitions are poignant to me. So hopefully that creates a clear distinction for you. Second, it is important to establish a positive, supportive, and loving relationship with your child. Without this foundation, your child has no reason other than fear to demonstrate good behavior. The third idea is to use positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement will increase the desired behavior that we want to see from our children. It really does work. It doesn't only work for children, it also works for adults. It works for humans. Positive reinforcement is the bomb. Distractions can also be helpful in changing a child's focus, which will encourage them to stop doing the behavior that we don't want to see them do. Sometimes children misbehave because they're bored and because they don't know any better. So finding them something else to do would be excellent. The fourth idea is to practice controlling your own temper. And the operative word is practice. Practice controlling your own temper. I'm mindful that raising a child who you love very much, who may be an adventurous soul in exploring the world and perhaps getting into certain things that would be harmful or undesired or whatever, can be difficult to be with. So practice controlling your own temper. Children learn what they live. Teach your child right from wrong with calm words and actions. Model behaviors that you would want to see in your own child. Finally, use appropriate timeouts for young children. The AAP tells us that a timeout can be especially useful when a specific house rule or rule in general is broken. The idea here is that there has been some sort of conversation letting the child know what is expected of them behaviorally, and then they would have an idea like, yep, you broke a rule, so here is the consequence. This form of discipline works best by warning a child that they will get a timeout if they don't stop. That reminds them that what they are doing or did was wrong. Be mindful to use as few words as possible. That would be so difficult for me. I'll have time to figure that out. Use as few words as possible and with as little emotion as possible. Be mindful to remove them from the situation for a preset length of time. Removing them from the situation is putting them in timeout, not in their bedroom in a corner. 1 minute per year of age is a good rule of thumb. I hope that this information was helpful to you, especially to the person who wrote in. And yes, my dear, your boyfriend was correct. There is data to back that up. Speaking of which, I have all of this handy information in the show notes. While you are completing your own research with the information I share with you, please go to my website, which is myhoneybeetherapy.com, and read up on any blogs that I have, catch up on old episodes, and feel free to drop me a line in case you would like your particular question or concern presented on a future episode. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Until next time, peace.